Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. Lots changed since we talked to you last. Even in the darkest and bleakest times, I like to maintain some level of gallows humor. As we all know, we had the debate Thursday night last time, day after we all spoke. It's interesting. Obviously there was a lot going on in the debate. When the debate happened, kind of when it happened in the calendar, we had all these Supreme Court cases coming out. That is under Kate's purview. So when we did the Instapod last week, I think we were recording within maybe 3 or 4 minutes after when the debate ended. So you got a very, raw take much sooner than, certainly in my experience, we do things. And we were, I think, pretty frank with how it went. And it went, it was terrible. And we have seen over the last week that has not changed. And as we, it's funny. I noticed something. As I've tried to share my thoughts with you over the course of the last week, what I'm seeing, the best I can make sense of what is happening, and the choices that Democrats nationwide, Democratic voters, the big stakeholders in the Democratic Party, what they face. But things started to crystallize for me in a different way on Monday. And what I mean by that, and a few people I talked to, and I was starting to kind of sense this myself, President Biden, right after the debate, appeared at a post debate rally and was sort of energetic and talking his line and everything. And then the next day there was a rally in North Carolina, and by all accounts it was boisterous and energetic, and exactly what you'd want to see from a presidential candidate. And Democrats seized on that, right? To kind of like, okay, the debate was terrible, but look at this, like, an hour later or a day later, night and day. And that's true. It was night and day. And what I have thought from the beginning here is that, it runs the gamut hypothesizing what was going on for Joe Biden Thursday night. There is no question that a major thing going on Thursday night is that Joe Biden is not the Joe Biden that he was back in 2012. He's also not the Joe Biden he was in 2020. Now, I have made the point, that's a separate question from how he is able to do the job as president. But I mean, let's just face reality. He's different. He's a much older man. How much did the sort of the being fatigued, being under the weather, all these different kinds of things, some mix of bad luck, how much that factored into this, um, who knows? But that had clearly a profound impression on people. And it had a profound impression on Democrats for whom questions of the president's age have loomed over them for a long time. It was an issue back in 2020, right? It's been out there for a very long time. And again, there is a certain basic level that we've known this is the case. He looks different. He walks differently. He talks differently, etc. But how big a deal, we haven't known exactly, right? And the debate certainly gave the impression of like, okay, wow, that was not at all what I expected. What are we doing here? Okay. Um, the only way to solve something like this, to restore confidence in his campaign and so forth, is what they tell riders: show, don't tell. Right? You got to get out there and just start doing it. And if rallies make more sense from him, then do rallies, do whatever. But what I noticed Monday was sort of like, what's the plan here exactly? Because it seemed like the president was kind of in seclusion, sort of, right? And on Friday, everybody's kind of under a thunderclap and everything. And he clearly wanted to sort of, convene with his family, kind of have some time with his family to recharge, discuss whatever over the weekend. But by Monday, I was kind of starting to wonder, like, okay, this is not a time to go dark. Now, after the Supreme Court decision, the immunity decision, the shocking immunity decision, and we are, just before we began the podcast, Kate and I were debating, all right, which do we talk about first here? And they, I think one of the things that we are all experiencing at the moment is we've got a long list of really terrible things happening at one time, right? And it's a little hard to keep track. We agreed that we kind of had to get into the debate and the aftermath of the debate first, and we are going to get to the immunity decision. Also, in some ways, they are very organically connected. But we're going to sort of let it flow organically, kind of, when we talk about each one. In any case, so the president went out, made a statement about the immunity decision. That statement was fine. I'm not sure it really kind of counted against what I'm saying here, which is sort of like, okay, you need to get out there and settle this, right? Settle this issue. Now, some people have a very simple answer to this, and that is that they are not doing that because they can't do that, because the debate is the sort of the state that Joe Biden is in now. I'm not so sure about that. In some ways, the rally he spoke at the day after the debate kind of tells me that. But leadership is a funny thing. Joe Biden is the leader of the country. He's also the leader of the Democratic Party. He's the leader of his campaign. Leaders need to lead. There is only one person. We are not going to settle this question by discussing the state of Joe Biden's cognitive health. It's something that just has to be demonstrated. And I see there's a lot of there's a lot of reporters out there giving lists of demands. He has to do 3 sit-down interviews and, two, kind of no time limit press conferences to show us what he's got. I don't really, I don't really go for that. That's not it to me. He's got to do whatever it is he's going to do. Just to settle this. Maybe it's, do a bunch of rallies. I don't know what it is, but he has to do something. And as we've seen, kind of nature abhors a vacuum. And what we have had for going on a week now, we're almost a week, is we've had a vacuum for a week. And a lot of stuff has gone into that vacuum. A lot of people's agita and angst and everything else under the sun and their fear. And, in situations like this, I keep an eye on the polls, not because polls are everything. They are a moving target. They say one thing in the moment, but that's what they say in that moment. I watch them because we are exposed to so much cacophony of opinions and angst and people's fears and interested parties game playing that it's very hard to know what's happening. Polls are, at least if you put a lot of them together, they're like the instrument panel when you're flying in a storm, right? They are a kind of a concrete reality that at least can balance. You're hearing all these different things. It's a classic thing when they talk about instrument panel flying. When you're in a storm, it's easy for pilots to think they're upside down when they're not, or they are flying level when actually they're flying downwards. That's why you have your instrument panel. The polls themselves don't show a lot of change. They show, in aggregate, Biden dropping a point, maybe a point and a half over the last week, which is something that can easily be accounted for by what's called non-response bias. Democrats being so bummed out that they're not answering the phone as much, right? That's what often happens in response to sort of big news. But having said all that, there is a vacuum at the moment, which is very, very worrisome and I think probably unsustainable for Democrats. As I said, it's a cliche, but leaders need to lead. That is the primary job of leading, the primary job responsibility of leading. And what we have had over the last week is a seeming vacuum in which so many things have rushed in. And a kind of performance of what Biden's enemies have charged him with. That there's no one at the wheel. Now, I don't believe that in terms of, who's running policy with Ukraine and all the different things. But running president is being the president is a big thing. And I think there is a problem there. And I got the sense starting this morning that there's a good chance that we are on the way towards Biden stepping aside and having someone else running for president in his place. And I have said, many, many times that there are huge, huge costs to doing that. But that may be where we are. And if it is, it will be up to everyone in the Democratic Party to quickly assemble behind whoever that other person is going to be. My sense is that it can only really be one person, and then you move forward. So, and again, that's not even my opinion about what should happen. I think my opinion about what should happen is irrelevant. I think it is. It seems to me increasingly likely that that is what is happening, but we will see. Maybe we'll even see before the time you listen to this podcast. Kate, what do you think?
So the options after the debate were what's less risky, staying with Biden or having him step aside. Now, that first option, the only way that's a winning option is predicated on the idea that he can turn around what happened at the debate. And the only way to do that was for him to be active, to be out there, to kind of blanket interviews, in some ways to take advantage of the opportunity of people paying attention to him for once, because everyone would be waiting to see if he dies on camera. So in some ways it was a big moment, right? Like, he can get out there, he knows he's going to have to take some questions about why'd you suck at the debate, and then he has a rare opportunity to make up for what he missed during the debate, get in those pre-prepared shots at Trump and pre-prepared boosting of his record and what he's going to do next term, and et cetera, et cetera. As you said, he didn't do that. I mean, he took the regrouping time. We know he's got an ABC interview coming up, but otherwise it's been what we've seen from the campaign so far, these kind of under the radar teleprompter events, whether that be kind of an afternoon rally in front of a friendly audience, or, he made remarks about climate change at a specific event. And that's when I started shifting personally from maybe it's less risky to push on with him to maybe he should step aside, because there is no option that is continuing as he's been doing. Before the debate, that had him at generously a tie, I think. I mean, pretty consistently lagging a bit in the battleground states. Post the debate, his position obviously gets worse. So the solution to that cannot be continuing the same way he's been conducting his campaign before, and it has. And that raises the scariest question of all, which is, if we can figure this out, surely his campaign is aware of it, and that leads you to the uncomfortable conclusion that he can't do anything different, that he can't meaningfully kind of get out in a more vulnerable, exposed, combative communication strategy, because the downside would be too bad, right? That he wouldn't be able to do it. And that's something that we've been saying on the pod for a while. Like, we're all terrified of Trump. It makes the stakes of this so huge, but he can't be president if he can't do those things. And it's unfortunate because the job of candidate and the job of president, we're all aware they're very different jobs. And that can be really infuriating, because someone who's a great president is kept from the office because he's not a good candidate. And in some ways, the qualities that make a good candidate, encourage psychopaths to get into the ring, right? I mean, it's not a great system, but it's where we are. And that vacuum, as you described it, is clearly not just worrying us. You're having Nancy Pelosi go on TV and say, I think it's fair to ask if that was just an episode, or, kind of how he is now, which also indicates, and she said at the beginning of that interview, this was a day or two ago, he hadn't called her since the debate, which is also, what are you doing? Like, after something like that, you marshal your forces, right? Like, you are working the phones. You're convincing everyone that you're fine. It was a bad night. It sucked. And you need to kind of rally the troops and move on. And he's doing that. It's kind of similar to the ABC interview. He's doing it in a piecemeal kind of way, right? Now he's having governors to the White House, and they're starting to do, he called Schumer today. They're starting to do this outreach, but it's all happening in this way that completely lacks
urgency in a way that I find both confusing and a bit of a misreading of the moment. And so my own stance has shifted a little bit in the past few days, which is if our options are not what I thought they would be, which is a reinvigorated, re energized, new, more communicative Biden or him dropping out, if our options are actually that was the top of his game, that's the best we've got from him, or dropping out, it has to be dropping out because A is not going to win. Like, we have pretty conclusive proof that it won't. And I do want to make this clear. And Josh, this is something you've been good and clear about for a long time. There's so much uncertainty right now, and I don't think anyone can say with any confidence which of these two is the less risky path. They both, frankly, have unacceptable levels of risk.
I mean,
But
they're both like absurd.
yeah,
They're both
absurd.
absurd. Yeah.
But one thing I am absolutely 100% confident about is the B option is Kamala Harris. It is not let's draft Gavin Newsom. It is not let's draft Gretchen Whitmer, whoever else performs well on cable news. It is insane. It's just insane to think that the Democratic Party could bypass the competent, qualified Black female vice president for any assortment of these white blue state governors that people like for a whole host of reasons, including, I mean, it's racist and sexist. Second of all, Black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party, and you think you can skip over one and not alienate wide swaths of the core constituencies. Third, the scrutiny and vetting that you get running for even the governor's mansion in a safe blue state is very different than the scrutiny and vetting you get as a
Non-existent.
presidential or vice presidential candidate. And there is absolutely not time for skeletons to come out of the closet in this 4-month span. Harris would get the campaign infrastructure seamlessly. She would get the money. And, you know, on top of all that, it's the options are Biden stays in or he bows out, he blesses Harris. There's no drama at the convention. The wagons immediately circle. She has the whole, you know, I'm basically the president. I've been in the White House for all this. It was half my administration, right? She gets to run on his accomplishments. She gets to have the same theory of the case that he does. And then she gets a little additional sprinkling of like, she started her career in law enforcement and she's running against a criminal, which is like kind of a nice panache to have. So we don't know which of the options are less risky. We do know without an absolute doubt our options are Biden or Harris blessed by Biden. And that's it. That's the end of the options.
There's one other point that is maybe just implicit, but I think is worth bringing up. And in some ways, it is the biggest one. And I will preface this by saying that I am not a huge fan of Kamala Harris as an electoral politician. And let me be very clear what I mean by that. I started the 2020 campaign thinking she's the one. She's got it, right? We're in a sort of a different moment now. She's a Black woman. She's dynamic. She's got this sort of, you know, kind of prosecutor background, blah, 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 blah. And then I saw her run a campaign that I found kind of clumsy. And the things that I found clumsy were, at least the pattern that I saw, was that she would sometimes, I mean, the Medicare for All thing was a sort of, for me, a good example. As people know, people know where I am on these issues. Doesn't really matter. In the sort of the heat of the moment, when there were a lot of candidates saying, yeah, Medicare for all, she said, yeah, Medicare for all. No one likes their private, you know, no one likes their insurance company. And then over a period of a week, she found out, oh, okay, I guess there's a reason why this is electorally, this was a lot more complicated than I thought, and sort of like, you know, reeled it back over 2 weeks, and sort of like, man, I want you to see 5 or 6 chess moves ahead. Don't find that out in real time. There's a reason why a lot of politicians who think, wow, if we could just have something like they have in Europe, that would be so much better. But in fact, we're here in America and there's all these entrenched interests and there's a blah, 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 blah. In any case, point being, I thought, wow, okay, just didn't run the kind of campaign I thought. But there's an issue of democratic legitimacy here. And that matters a lot more than like what Josh Marshall thought of her campaign 4 years ago. And one of the things that has really struck me here, and it will continue to strike me, even if we find out in a couple days that Biden drops out, and, you know, in a sense, they predicted it, is a lot of columnists. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the New York Times op-ed page. A lot of columnists, and not just jerk columnists, some columnists who I respect a lot, you know, blowing out of the gate on Friday or Saturday in this very like, it must happen. He must drop out. And we will have a process and we'll have some barbecues and each governor will give a speech and then we'll all unite. And I was so angered by the lack of humility of these people. Like, who the fuck are you? Especially with the Times editorial page. What the fuck are you talking about? Now, you know, Joe Biden was elected president in 2020. Kamala Harris was elected vice president in 2020. We all of us who voted for Biden made the very explicit political decision nominating Harris, voting for her. Sure, we were voting for Biden, but there's what we were actually doing. We made the decision. If Joe Biden cannot serve 4 years, Kamala Harris will become president. That invests her with a lot of legitimacy. That was a democratic act. This year, people who voted as Democrats in the primaries, decided we're going to nominate Joe Biden again. Millions of people voted, okay? Technically, Kamala Harris wasn't voted for there, but she was, in effect. That happened. That is how we invest decisions with democratic legitimacy in this country. We had a vote. It's decided. You can't just see one thing and say, oh, now we're going to, I don't know, Nancy Pelosi's going to get together with Barack Obama and just set that aside. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? Like, first of all, who the fuck are you? But it's not just, who are you, big name columnists, but kind of like that democratic legitimacy stuff is actually a big deal. That's actually a big deal. That's what makes everything real and valid. So I preface the original part by saying this isn't me, like I'm a huge Kamala Harris, and this is just my excuse for saying why it has to be her. But it has to be her. You just can't. That stuff matters. Not even getting into the fact of like all of these columnists say this stuff about there will be a process and then everyone will unite. What the fuck? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, really? Everybody's going to unite? I mean, okay, what fucking planet are you living on? Or just to make, some kind of obvious points. Do you think Gaza is going to come up during this process that everyone's going to unite after? There are some major divisions right now in the Democratic Party that I don't care which side of those you're on. The Democratic Party cannot run this campaign based on a kind of a primal scream session about the things that divide the party. It has to be Harris. It just does. It just does.
And there are also some pieces of a potential Harris candidacy that I honestly find exciting, that I've only kind of started thinking about in these past few days. Because honestly, in the immediate aftermath of the debate, I thought I thought he would be able to stabilize the ship. I kind of
Mhm.
thought that
Mhm.
he was going to have a change in strategy. You mentioned his first couple events afterwards like went well,
Those made it seem like that was a proof of concept, sort of.
exactly. But now that it's feeling to me much less certain that he's going to stay in. And also, we didn't mention, but you have started to have Democratic electeds calling for him to step down, which was not happening right afterwards.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's in the stew as well. But there's something to be said for, in this ridiculously bifurcated media landscape, to have something new and shiny 4 months before the election, especially in a campaign cycle where everybody hates the two candidates and finds them completely, unexciting and unappealing. I think there's something to be said for the fact that her candidacy would kind of blot out Trump to some extent, which obviously you want to do a balancing act. You want people to remember how insane he is and everything. But, that hasn't really been happening so far either.
Mhm.
You have the idea of what if she stepped in and did the September debate. I mean, I have no confidence that Trump wouldn't kind of flee from that prospect, but imagine how much better and more comfortable you'd feel with her debating Trump than Biden. And I don't even think that Kamala Harris is like an all-time debater.
She would
So,
make the key points. She
yeah,
would make the key points.
right. So, I mean, there's all of these things. There's the idea that a potential Black female president would be really exciting and invigorating to a huge swath of the Democratic base. There's the fact that she is much more comfortable in the abortion terrain than Biden is, who, it's always been a very uncomfortable fit for him to be the one who kind of has to be the abortion rights crusader in this moment. She's young. She would, in that way, draw a pretty stark contrast with Trump. I mean, there are things about her candidacy that I think could be very exciting. And because we've already discussed that some of the logistical impediments would be much easier for her than it would this like fantastical kind of third candidate, it's not that hard to imagine a smooth transition. Now, of course, we don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about this, right? She's a Black woman. The sexist, racist backlash is going to be, if she's put in this position, is going to be a tsunami. It's going to be awful. Trump and the gang are going to, they've already done this with her. They've kind of tried to do the Obama birtherism thing a little bit because she's the daughter of immigrants. They'll do horrible stuff about her Jewish husband, I'm sure. It'll be all the hits, right? All the hits. And in some ways, in the past, they found her easier to demonize than Biden. So they've tried out some various things like, he's senile and she's pulling the strings, right? Because she's like a Black woman immigrant is kind of scarier to his base than a white man. But I mean, we've seen of late from the Trump campaign's behavior, they'd rather have Biden stay in. Like, they like where things are right now,
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, no certitude here. I have absolutely no idea if it's less risky to have Biden or to go with Harris. But I think there are pluses about a Harris candidacy. I think it could be exciting to people. It could be invigorating to people. And I am just really, really worried that status quo Biden campaign, especially on this side of that debate, that's not going to cut it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, one thing I have tried to tell myself in recent days is that the Democratic Party is going to have to collectively make a decision with nowhere near the information that is required to make the decision, and that's just a fact. That is just a fact, and at a certain point, you have to you just have to accept that fact. In a few posts I've done since the debate, I use this metaphor of kind of like, we people who believe in democracy, who see the requirement of needing to, you know, deny Trump another term, we are all sort of like, the GIs in the landing craft going into Normandy on D-Day. And the landing craft, we're in the water, we're right coming up on the beach, and we need a decision. And the decision is not going to be ours, but we need a decision. And that applies just as much if we are moving towards a Kamala Harris candidacy as if we were moving to, YOLO Joe Biden, let's do it candidacy. We need a decision. And when that decision comes down, and, I get weary of like, oh, what do you mean the decision comes down? Are we just peons and blah? Come on, man. There's a handful of people who are going to make this decision. And when the decision is made, we're just going to have to storm onto the beaches. And that means that we are going to make everything the best out of Kamala Harris's candidacy. And there are advantages to it. There are pluses to it. It is just a fact that the age thing with President Biden has just been weighing on everybody. Everybody gets that. Everybody sees that. It's been an anxiety in the background for everyone. And it will be nice not to have that, right? I mean, if there's a September debate, she may come off poorly or do some strategic whatever, but she's going to be there and she's going to be present. She's going to be, kind of talking right at Trump's face and getting in his face and all that kind of stuff. And look, there is certainly a generational thing here. And, all the stuff about, a majority of black people are going to vote for Donald Trump. That's not going to happen, but that doesn't need to happen. You need to have younger voters. You need to have voters of color. You need them, you need them energized and present. I mean, look, it's also the case that one of the sort of the part of the magic of the Biden presidency is that he can have a pretty progressive presidency, just policy terms. There are certain stars that came aligned where all the different factions of the party kind of got behind him. And yet for your sort of like, occasionally politically interested voter, he's just kind of a normal guy, old white guy. What do you have to worry about? He's just a kind of a, the guy your dad drank with at the bar kind of guy, right? So didn't get anybody's hackles up. Let's be honest. There's people who Kamala Harris is going to get their hackles up, and if that is latent racism, latent sexism, we can decry that, but that's where we are. Right. So let's not pretend that's not the case. That our wishing that is not the case does not make that not the case. Having said that, though, and again, I say this all in the context of you wait for the decision and then you plow onto the beach and you find every advantage you can with it. And there's no question that as much as you are going to have an avalanche of Obama birther, angry black woman, closet radical, secretly a man, they come up with who knows what shit they come up with, right? Everything under the sun. That at a certain level, man, change the story, bud. You're not running against Joe Biden. We've got a new story, right? And you can see the Trump thing has been since the debate, like, you're not going anywhere. You can't give the money to anybody else. And I don't think that's just because, they secretly know that Biden was the one they could beat. They hoped they could beat him, but they've been running this plan for 3 years. It's hard to have everything change. And, look, when everything is going to hell, there are some advantages in totally changing the script. There's massive, massive dangers to it. But you throw the other side a curveball. And again, if that's where we're going, you got to play that to the hilt.
And our theory of the case has been the reason why we were not as kind of amenable to the Biden shouldn't be the nominee argument many months ago was because the polling didn't suggest it, right? It's not like he was behind by 10 points. Like, it was fairly tied. We thought we were still operating with State of the Union Joe Biden, which is part of the reason why I just feel so angry right now that we are left in this position. But we didn't have the facts, right? And part of the reason why I think this next week things are moving a little faster than I thought they would. I thought we would have kind of a 2-week dust settling period where you actually see what's going to happen with the polls, because you're not going to see it in these day after polls. It's going to take a little bit to settle in, and we'll see if the bottom actually falls out, because you don't throw a Hail Mary pass if you're winning, right? So, if the polls start kind of going to hell, and we're getting some indications that, there's been from what we see so far, small, slight movement away from Biden. And then we're seeing some like super worrying things about, suddenly New Hampshire is competitive, that I don't know how much stock to put in that. But we're in that kind of limbo where we don't have a lot of data. And as you say, whenever this decision is made, we are not going to have the data that we need. But we're still in this like kind of turbulent, unsettled time. So to some degree, what's happened so far is what you would expect. Democratic wagon circling around Biden while they kind of do damage control, basically. But that wagon circling is already kind of starting to break up. Biden's not necessarily acting like someone who is 100% committed to staying in right now. And we're just going to it's going to be scary either way. It's going to be scary, right? Like, and I want to say, we like Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden has far and away had the most progressive presidency of my lifetime. I am kind of in awe with what he did in his first term, given how tiny his margins were. I think he would be a great president if he got the chance to do it again, but he's got to win the campaign first. And it's just, that seems to be slipping away. And that is too big a risk. You can't take what we know and, if it keeps trending in the wrong direction, and just stay the course, because the alternative is so scary and so risky, which it is. It's just, if we stick with Biden, maybe he loses. If we switch to Harris, maybe she loses. It's a horrible, horrible situation to be in. And some part of me is still not quite accepted the fact that, after 2020, I really felt like Trump was going to be fatally diminished at that point, right? He had lost so much, and in these high profile ways. And now he's the favorite going into this election. And, you mentioned we just had a Supreme Court opinion that will make him all the more dangerous if he's in that position. So, I understand what I'm seeing, from some people in my life and from some people in the wild, that this kind of knee-jerk reflexive protection of Joe Biden, I understand that. I think some of that stems from the way he's been treated for a lot of his political career, that he's kind of too dumb or not talented enough, or not nobody's first choice kind of politician. And I also think, to sprinkle in some media criticism, there's no question at all that a ton of mainstream reporters right now are actively rooting for him to drop out. And I think that there is probably some degree of good faith people who are worried about a Trump presidency. There's I think greater slice, which I'm seeing every day from people who are nominally straight news reporters, which just stems from the fact that would be so exciting. That would shake up the whole race. Imagine all the pieces to be written. It would be a hugely dynamic event to kind of fall into their laps.
It's exciting. Yeah.
So all of that stuff is true. And I understand the people who are kind of protective of Biden for those reasons. And No one wishes more than me that he had fucking killed that debate performance, that he wiped the floor with Trump, that he silenced his critics, that he got a bump in the polls, that things are looking good. This is a horrible situation to be in. But from here, he is the one who's solely responsible for making the decision. It's either going to be him or it's going to be Harris with his blessing. That's where we are.
Yeah, and there's two things I would add to that. One, believe it or not, I think a positive to keep in mind, and as long as they are so thin on the ground, it's good to note them when you find them. The first thing is that the president, Joe Biden, the leader of the Democratic Party, needs to maintain the confidence of the members of the party, and that means voters. And that also means the stakeholders who are, and when I say stakeholders, I mean top elected officials, donors, kind of opinion leaders. You gotta get them on board. And he is seeming to be unable to do that at the moment, and for reasons that are stemming from him. And when I say that, it's sort of like if he's out there doing the things he needs to do and people are just being dicks, and that's one thing, but at the moment he's not doing the things that he needs to do in this situation. I think that is a fact. And to me, I don't need to get into speculating why he's not doing it. It's just the fact that he's not doing it is what is consequential. The other part is that this conversation, the one we are having, needs to stop, and only he can stop it. And if we are going to spend the entirety of this next 4 months having the entire political class speculating about A, Joe Biden's mental fitness, and B, his campaign, that's not going to work. This conversation has to stop. And either he will stop it or he will end up stepping aside, and that will stop it. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is we need to remember to buoy ourselves is that there are a majority of the people in this country do not want to see another Trump presidency. That is a fact. That is an absolute fact. There is a huge minority in this country. I don't know whether it's 45%, 48%. I think there's a chance it may be 52% of people who will crawl over broken glass to avoid another Trump presidency. What that tells me is that there's not going to be, like, I saw this, I don't know, maybe it was Punch Bowl, one of these, newsletters that I torture myself with yesterday, kind of saying, now Democrats are thinking the Senate and the House is lost. There's going to be a bloodbath. Everybody's going to lose. I don't buy that. Because whatever happens with Joe Biden, I think we remain in a country where there is thermonuclear opposition to Donald Trump and people who support Donald Trump. And I, it's funny. One of these pollsters who kind of polled everybody under the sun against Donald Trump, they polled Michelle Obama against Donald Trump, and it was like, 52-39 or something like that. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, why not Kermit the Frog against Donald Trump? What are we talking about here? Right? That is never going to happen. And like, what we're so far into make up your own adventure, whatever. But it reminded me of something indirectly, which is that most people in this country do not want another Donald Trump presidency. That is a fact. And every poll that I have seen, whether it's Biden losing this, losing that, none of them show Trump going up. So what I take from that is that, notwithstanding the epic disaster of the last week, and when I say epic disaster, that is inclusive of Joe Biden's really terrible showing in the debate and the collective freak out from like everybody who doesn't support Donald Trump, basically. Notwithstanding that, you are still going to be in a position where you've got a ton of voters who will do anything to oppose Donald Trump. So you're not going to be that far from victory. Whether you can, really get over the hump and do the final level of it, I don't know. But this idea again, and these newsletters and the people who run them, there's I know a lot of these people, and I used to know a lot more of them. One of the things that happened when I moved to New York, and really when TPM was just starting out, I pulled back from all of that. I don't see a lot of these people ever, because I don't live in DC, and I kind of live a fairly secluded life with my family. A lot of these people are really nice people personally. Even some are friends of mine. Professionally, there's some really dark shit there. How that part of journalism works, what its values are, and sort of the way they sort of are in this very tangled and ugly relationship with the Democratic Party, kind of, feeding on each other's, one side gleeful, one side anxious. The bottom is not going to fall out for opposition to Donald Trump. That is not going to happen. So let's just kind of keep our feet on the ground and remember that. And whatever happens now with Joe Biden, with Kamala Harris, whatever, the forces of anti-Trumpness are still going to be in the game. And there are 4 months. That's at the same time a ridiculously short period of time, but also a really fucking long period of time. So, keep that in mind.
So let's talk about the immunity decision before we wrap, which came down the last day of the term. They stretched that out as long as humanly possible. And, after watching oral arguments, I think most of us were of the camp that what seemed most likely is they were going to kind of send this back down, have them sift through the official versus unofficial acts as per the charges on the indictment, which would amass a ton of delay, kind of give Trump a win in another name, blah, blah, blah. Which they did, but they did it so much worse than I think even the most cynical were expecting. So, for those of you who maybe have been so deep in political depression that you've kind of avoided the particulars here, the nuts and bolts of it are a president's actions that fall within his core constitutional powers. Those get absolute immunity. The rest of the perimeter of his quote unquote official acts, which no, the court did not define, those get presumptive immunity, which in theory can be overcome by prosecutors in trials, though again, the court didn't define how strict presumptive immunity is, how high a barrier that is, how to overcome it. And then unofficial acts, if prosecutors can find any, get no immunity. By the way, P.S. addendum, you cannot bring in any evidence related to an official duty while proving that a president committed a crime in his unofficial duties. Even if it's, say, conversation around an official duty that helps prove the case, which is a complete departure from almost all of our evidentiary standards in this country, right? I was talking to an expert yesterday who kind of was talking about a case that Sotomayor cited in her dissent, which is about this gang member in a prison. Okay, he's part of a white supremacist gang, Aryan Brotherhood or something. is he allowed? Does he have free speech rights? Does he have freedom of association? Can he be part of a white nationalist gang? Of course. But for the prosecutors who are trying to prove that, he committed a murder or whatever as part of this gang, his association with the gang is a pretty important piece of evidence in proving that then he did this gang murder, right? Like, that's how it works. And they've taken that completely off the table, which in practical terms is going to be really tough for Jack Smith, in whatever alternate universe where he ever gets to like try this case for real, because it takes away a huge swath of evidence for no reason. And we're already seeing, Trump immediately turned around, headed to New York and is like, by the way, you guys use some official acts evidence in proving this case. You can't do that anymore. So you got to toss out my conviction. And that's all going to kind of hinge on this idea of quote unquote harmless error, where the judge is going to have to determine, was that evidence, duplicative? Was it something the conviction rested on, or was it just kind of part of a broader tapestry, not really necessary, kind of superfluous? So, I mean, we'll see how that goes. But my God, it was bad. And they went beat for beat with the main charges in the indictment, and, doing this whole kind of, we're going to let the lower courts kind of sift this out, except also here's what we think about it. And, so Trump's kind of bullying and attempts to leverage his Justice Department to enact the fake elector scheme. Absolute immunity, no worries about it. I guess prosecutorial independence also died the same day. So that's off the table. And everything else they named, the pressuring Mike Pence, the pressuring state officials, the tweets, all of them, even when they were pretending to do the little like, this one is tricky, each of them was inserted with like, but there's a good case to be made that this gets presumptive immunity. Roberts did not name one charge where he was like, this is definitely an unofficial act. You're good to go here, Smith. So, I mean, tailor-made to kind of get Trump off the hook here. And from the larger picture, just a massive restructuring of our government, like a huge accrual of power for the president, and then to a secondary degree, the judiciary, with some feigning of like, well, Congress can legislate guardrails around official acts. And it's like, sure, yeah, what Congress can do that, right? I mean, based on the kind of president that's going to take advantage of these new unbridled ability to do crimes with impunity, it's going to have to be a Democratic trifecta in Congress, and it's going to have to be either enough senators to overcome the filibuster, or the kind of senators who will get rid of it. And how often do we see those, right? And they're always fleeting. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how our listeners or you felt, Josh, but by this point, I was so steeped in negativity and worry that I almost didn't even feel anything from this opinion, almost like a gallows humor, kind of like, wow, this is so bad, to just kind of cap off this dreadful couple weeks we've been having.
So just to make the point, to from what Kate was saying, we thought the expectation was, I think for most people, certainly for us at TPM, that Supreme Court, the right-wing majority, would come back with some limited area of potential immunity that presidents have in a case like this, with a limited, but that would still require going back to the trial court and litigating each fact. Is this count? Is that count? You get your delay through November, mission accomplished. I think most people were thinking it was not in the realm of possibility that the court would do something that was basically like, presidents are just immune. You can't prosecute a president after the fact. And that is really what this is. It's not absolute immunity. It's not blanket immunity. As Kate said, you got your 3 buckets. But here's the thing, is that, all of this official acts sounds meaningful. It's not meaningful at all, because it is precisely the president's official powers, his official acts. You use official powers, they kind of become official acts, because if they're not things that are official acts, you can't use your official powers to do them. They're pretty, inextricably combined. Those are really all we care about. As I said in one of these posts, we're not worried about the president like stealing a toaster, or like, I don't know, he like, forges a deed to a piece of property. Normal crimes that anybody can do, yeah, president should be responsible for them, held to account. He beat his child. It's not a theoretical one with Trump, he raped someone. But these are not the things that we are really worried about, because those are things anybody can do. We're worried about, we give the president unbelievable power, and we're worried about them abusing that power. So by taking official acts off the table, you kind of end the game. And in the way they did it, whatever kind of fancy language they use, clear-cut official acts are just, that's absolute immunity. End of story. Presumptive immunity for like everything else that might in some way be official, that's pretty good. You just get some good lawyers in there and you can take care of that. And even unofficial acts, I guess they said like talking to Mike Pence is like their example of an unofficial act. But like, did they not say that?
No, they said, well,
that it might not be or something.
Well, they were like, well, he was in his capacity as president of the Senate and not vice president. However, by not letting the president talk to his vice president about matters of legislation, which are, inherent to advancing his agenda, you might be infringing on the powers of the executive branch. So they wiggled their way back to official acts by the end.
Okay. Well, here's the thing, and this is something that people don't think about a lot. The American presidency is based on 18th century kingship, particularly the British monarch. And that sounds funny because, wait, Josh, they were trying to build a republican government, kind of not kings, whatever. When they came to build the Constitution, though, they did want a more energetic, powerful executive. That was the whole thing with the Articles of Confederation. The only model they could think of was kings. And so they did all these things to constrain this person, a president that they were creating. They layered all these things on top of it. But that was still the model that they thought of. That's what an executive is. It's a king. So how do you take a king? You make the king elective. You do all these other things. But because of that, the American president is still, in many key ways, still based on 18th century monarchs. And where that becomes meaningful is that their power is inherently personal in character. There are a lot of things that the president can do just because it is their will. It's their prerogative power. Just because they are the president, they can do a lot of things. That makes them very different from prime ministers and stuff like that, who are operating through no one's sprinkled any magic dust on them. They're operating through a series of processes. The reason this is meaningful is that, again, I think as the 6 justices understand, everything the president does is official. Sure, if maybe again, the highly relevant case of rape, considering Donald Trump has a record of this, if the president raped a woman in the White House, yeah, you'd have a pretty hard time saying that was like official. But outside of something like that, every conversation the president has with anybody in the political space is official, because the president is the president. So this is basically absolute immunity. Not technically, but in practice it is. And that is shocking. And it is everybody in this mix has more understanding of sort of a Supreme Court whatevers and laws. But I understand the founding documents of the United States. I have a lot of experience with that. And the idea that any of these people thought that you could have this thing as immunity from the law for presidents is so absurd and so contradicted by everything we know that it's just shocking. And again, it's a corrupt court, and they just decided to make this up.
And in terms of the core constitutional powers, the ones that get absolute immunity, so, a step beyond the official acts, I think even those are squishier than they might appear. I mean, the majority cites the take care clause quite a bit, which is that the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Okay, I mean, that's pretty broad. And her dissent, Sotomayor, was like, they're already using that as a catch-all, and those get absolute immunity, right? A court can't touch them. That's it. You're walled off. And even Barrett in her concurrence said, I just want to put out there that I don't think all exercises of the take care clause can fall under core constitutional powers, because it's obviously such a massive risk, and as someone I was talking to yesterday put it, like, so Trump calling Raffensperger and trying to convince him to find him the votes. So the court thinks that's an official act, right? Now that Trump has these guidelines, wouldn't he have probably found a way to make it a core constitutional duty rather than an official act, try to like find some way to shoehorn it into the take care clause or one of the other kind of broader writs of presidential power so he doesn't have to worry about it at all? I mean, it really is like a blueprint. Here's the way you can do crimes and not get in trouble for it at all. And we're helpfully providing some real world examples that Trump has already tried to like steer him along, so next time he can kind of come at it from a more insulated direction and make sure he doesn't have to deal with this stuff again. And the thing that's like so cumulatively angering about this is who's going to use these powers, Like I was almost kind of scoffing when I saw people half joking on Twitter being like, well, now Biden should just order a drone strike and kill the whole Supreme Court or whatever, which it's joking. But this idea that a Democratic president would kind of use these loosened parameters to do things in his own interest is just so farcical. A Democratic president isn't going to do that. It's going to be Trump and, whoever kind of comes next in the Trumpian mold who's going to use this to try to get an authoritarian spirit into the White House, knowing that he can do so with impunity. And like, one of the guys I talked to yesterday just said, this is the most authoritarian decision I've ever read in US law, because the underlying theory is predicated on the idea that to do the job of president, you need protection from criminal liability. I mean, that's crazy. That's dictatorship.
Well, yeah, it is. And the thing is, if you look at the Constitution when it discusses the presidency, there are a number of clauses that just amount to kind of keep everything awesome. Right. Just do what you got to do to keep everything good. and those are the kind of things that have allowed presidents to do a lot of important things, because the president's president, head of state. You want the president to have constitutional authority to fix things, to prevent bad things from happening. But that can't be the end of the story. And if, just to come back to this issue of what the Constitution actually says and what it doesn't say, the one thing that is embedded so deeply in the Constitution is no one gets total power. No one gets total immunity. The whole document is based on taking power and trying to couch it in, right? Trying to backstop it, trying to prevent it from being abused. So the idea that you would ever say presidents are totally immune from any any criminal consequences from anything they do as president, which is basically what this says. It doesn't prevent you from, stealing protect you on stealing a toaster, but for the being president stuff, that is totally alien in spirit to the entire document. And if someone says, well, okay, if it's so clear cut, why isn't it in there? Again, no one could conceive that this would require being said. And it's worth remembering that in England, what was then still England, 150 years before, they had executed a king. The idea that heads of state and monarchs could be criminally liable for things that they do as monarch was not like something no one ever thought of before. You could have said you can't ever prosecute the president. It doesn't say that, and that's a good indication that they didn't want that to be the case. I mean, how much more clear can you be, right?
And what really just sucks about this is if we lived in some parallel universe where Biden had killed it at the debate and was kind of running reinvigorated, this would have been such a good news cycle for him. I mean, what better argument that Biden or that Trump is too dangerous to let anywhere near the Oval Office than his court handing him powers
Immunity,
that an American president has never had before. I mean, as one person said to me, they've also rubber stamped him. They've pre-cleared him to drop the 2 federal cases against him if he got reelected. I mean, now they've said his communications with the Department of Justice get absolute immunity. Boom. He doesn't even have to worry about it. He's cleared.
Yeah. No, and let's remember, this can still be a good news cycle for Democrats. It's hard to talk about something so grave as in political terms, but this is still out there, and people are not seeing this, right? I mean, this is still there. Yes, it is an interesting alternative universe to think about, but this still did happen in this universe, and it is going to continue to play out in a big way. I think that's certain.
All right.
So yeah, look, not a great week, folks, but this is still a lot to play out. And I don't say that in a kind of a Pollyannish kind of way. But this is looking to me different than it did even a couple days ago. And we're just going to have to wait and see where this all goes. In any case, I was going to say, should more dramatic events happen, we might be back with an Instapod. I mean, who am I kidding? I think we're going to have a lot of dramatic events. What those are, I'm not totally sure about. But we'll be here, and send us your comments. People are having a lot of very strong feelings right now, so share them with us. You can always get us, and we really do. Kate and I and other members of our team, we read those things. I spent virtually my whole weekend reading your emails. So send them in and tell us what you think, because we want to hear. And the email address is talk@talkingpointsmemo.com. talk@talkingpointsmemo.com. So send them in, and I think that's all we have for this week. Anything else?
Talk to you soon.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen.